He had survived gang wars. He had survived assassinations. He had survived the kind of betrayal that breaks most men into pieces they spend the rest of their lives trying to find. On a cold Tuesday morning in November, Vincent Kwan was sitting alone on a bench in Lincoln Park, Chicago, watching the lake, saying nothing, the way he did every Tuesday morning when the weight of his own silence became something he needed open air to carry. He had his coffee. He had his coat. He had the particular stillness of a man who had made peace, or something that resembled peace, with a version of his life that had cost him enormously to build. And then two little girls, no older than 7, identical in every visible way, breathless from running, appeared in front of him, grabbed his sleeve with their small trembling hands, and one of them whispered words that would detonate every wall he had spent 8 years constructing. "Please," she said, barely above a breath, her eyes locked directly onto his. "Pretend you're our dad." He looked up. 3 men in long coats were cutting across the park toward them at a pace that was not casual. "Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And if you are new here, click the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos." Now just stop and sit with that for a moment. You are on a park bench. You are alone. It is a Tuesday. You are not looking for anything complicated. And then 2 children you have never seen before in your life run up to you, grab your arm, and ask you, calmly, deliberately, without tears, without screaming, to pretend to be their father. And 3 men are already moving in your direction. What do you do? What does your instinct tell you in that exact 4-second window before your brain has finished processing what is happening? Because here is the thing about Vincent Kwan that you need to understand from the very beginning of this story. His instinct did not hesitate. His mind caught up later, but his instinct moved immediately. And by the time he had fully registered what was happening, his arm was already around the girl's shoulder, and he was looking up at the approaching men with an expression that communicated, without a single word, that they had reached the end of whatever it was they thought they were doing. But here is the question that should be sitting in the back of your mind right now, the question that this entire story turns on. How did these girls know his name? Because before Lily said another word, before the men had fully redirected away from them, she looked at him with those amber eyes that were, in a way he could not yet process, deeply familiar, and she said his real name. Not his street name. Not the name that the underworld knew. The name his mother had used. The name that existed in almost no public record anywhere. She said it the way a child says the name of someone they have heard about their whole life but are meeting for the first time. With recognition. With relief. With the specific, complicated emotion of a moment you have been told to prepare for but were never entirely sure would actually come. Who were these girls? Why did they know him? And how does a man who spent 8 years surgically removing himself from one of Chicago's most significant criminal networks end up sitting on a park bench on a Tuesday morning face to face with the only thing he had never been able to outrun, the possibility of a family? By the end of this story, one man will lose everything he built. And another will finally step into something he never planned for but, it turns out, had been quietly built for him all along. To understand that morning in Lincoln Park, you have to go back. You have to understand who Vincent Kwan was before the charcoal suits and the charity galas and the legitimate investment firm on Michigan Avenue. Because the man on that bench in November was not who he had always been. He was something he had constructed, deliberately and carefully, from the materials of a decision he made 8 years earlier. And like every structure built on top of a complicated foundation, it was only as stable as what it was built on. Vincent Kwan had spent the better part of his 30s as one of the most quietly formidable figures in Chicago's Korean-American criminal network. Not the loudest. Not the most publicly feared. But in every room that mattered, in every conversation that carried actual weight, Vincent was the one whose opinion changed the direction of things. He was strategic in the way that truly dangerous people are strategic, not impulsively, not dramatically, but with a patience and a precision that made him more effective than men who were louder and visibly more aggressive than he was. He had built influence the way a glacier builds a valley, slowly, completely, and by the time anyone fully noticed what had happened, the landscape had already changed permanently around them. He left that world voluntarily. Not because law enforcement forced his hand. Not because a rival made it untenable. He left because of a woman. And this is where the story becomes genuinely human in all the ways that matter, complicated, non-linear, and almost impossible to explain cleanly to someone who has not felt the specific, terrifying thing that happens when a person encounters something they care about more than the life they have built. Her name was Michelle. Michelle Park. He met her at a fundraising event on the North Side when she was 31 years old, and she was the kind of person whose presence in a room made the air feel different, not because she was performing anything, but because she was completely, fully herself in a way that people who have spent their lives performing other things find genuinely startling. Vincent, who had not been fully himself in longer than he could calculate, found that he could not stop paying attention to her. He did not pursue her strategically. This is important. Every other significant thing in Vincent's life he had approached with deliberation, with a plan, with contingencies, with a predetermined understanding of what he wanted to achieve and how he intended to achieve it. He pursued Michelle the way a person pursues something when they have already, on some level that precedes rational thought, understood that it is going to cost them everything. He told her he worked in private investment. He told her just enough truth to make the lie sustainable. And Michelle, who was perceptive in the deep, specific way that people who have been hurt learn to be perceptive, believed what she could see, which was a man who was, underneath whatever complicated things surrounded him, trying to become something better than what he had been. He remembered the specific evening he decided to get out entirely. They had been walking through Lincoln Park after dinner, the same park where, 8 years later, he would be sitting on a bench on a Tuesday morning, and Michelle had stopped to look at the lake, and the light was doing something extraordinary on the water, and she had leaned her head briefly against his shoulder without saying anything, and he had smelled her jasmine perfume and felt the specific, unbearable weight of having something worth losing for the first time in his adult life. He started making arrangements the following week. For months of careful, methodical disentanglement from everything he had built in the shadows. When it was done, he came back to Michelle. Ready. More ready than he had ever been for anything. But Michelle was gone. Her apartment was empty. Her phone disconnected. She had disappeared sometime in the 3 weeks between his last visit and the morning he arrived at her door intending to tell her the complete truth about who he was and who he was choosing to become. He searched. Of course he searched. Quietly, carefully, using every resource still available to him without pulling himself back into the world he had just exited. He found nothing. After 6 months of nothing, he did what people do when grief has no clear object to attach itself to. He moved forward. He built the legitimate business. He became the man in the charcoal suit. He told himself that Michelle had probably discovered something about his past and made the only reasonable choice available to her. He told himself that story long enough and consistently enough that most mornings he almost believed it. He sat on that park bench every Tuesday not because he had planned it as any kind of tribute, but because that was the park. And habits built around grief are the most durable habits of all. He never once considered that she had not left because of him. He never once considered that she had been running from something else entirely. Now let's talk about the girls. Because before you can understand what they did on that Tuesday morning in November, and why they did it with the calm, measured deliberateness of children far older than 7, you need to understand the life that had made them that way. Lily and Luna. That was what Michelle had named them. Born 7.5 years before that morning in the park, delivered 6 weeks early at a hospital in Indianapolis, where Michelle had relocated after leaving Chicago. She had moved quickly and taken almost nothing, a suitcase, a box of photographs, the modest savings she had from her work as a graphic designer. She moved because she had found out something that terrified her more than anything Vincent could have told her about his past. His name was Richard Caldwell. 54 years old, white-haired, impeccably dressed, the kind of wealthy that operates in a different dimension from ordinary financial success, the kind where money functions not as a resource but as a mechanism of absolute control. He ran a private equity firm operating through 3 shell corporations, and on the surface he was a respected figure in Chicago's financial community. He was also Michelle's ex-boyfriend. They had dated for 2 years before she met Vincent, and she had ended it because she had come to understand, with growing clarity, that Richard did not see her as a partner in any meaningful sense. He saw her as something he had acquired, something that could be set aside when inconvenient and retrieved when desired. She ended the relationship as cleanly as she could. Richard Caldwell was not a man who accepted things ending. When Michelle realized, shortly after Vincent began withdrawing from their contact during his 4 months of disentanglement, that Richard had resurfaced and was making his presence known through the particular, deniable channels that men like him used to communicate without leaving evidence, she did not wait to see how it escalated. She was pregnant. That fact reorganized everything. She left. She went to Indianapolis because she had a college friend there and because she needed distance and anonymity and a place where neither the man she loved nor the man who frightened her could easily reach her. She told herself it was temporary. 7 years later, she was still there. She raised Lily and Luna alone, and she was extraordinary at it in the quiet, undramatic way that real capability always is. 2 jobs at her peak, graphic design contracts during the day, remote customer service work 3 nights a week. She stretched every dollar and made sure the girls had what they needed and more than that, made sure they felt fully held by her love even in the moments when the logistics of their lives required her to be absent. She told the girls about their father. Not everything, they were children. But enough. She kept a single photograph, folded inside the front cover of a sketchbook, of a man with amber eyes and sharp cheekbones and an expression that was serious but not unkind. She told them his name. She told them he was good, even if things had been complicated. And she told them one rule, framed as practical safety information rather than the contingency plan it actually was. If you are ever in danger, she told them, find a man who looks like he can protect you. Walk up to him. Be calm. Ask for help. She showed them the photograph enough times that both of them had memorized the face. She never explicitly told them that this specific man was who they should look for. She never thought she would need to. But then, 8 weeks before that November Tuesday, Richard Caldwell found them. How he found them tells you everything about who Richard was. He had never stopped looking. 7 years. He maintained a background search, not urgent, not obsessive in any visible way, but consistent, the way a man with unlimited resources keeps a thread running when he has decided that something belongs to him and has simply not yet been returned. When he found her, he did not confront her directly. He applied pressure through proximity, a car she did not recognize parked outside her workplace 3 mornings in a row, a phone call from an unknown number that disconnected immediately when she answered, a message left with her neighbor that was precisely calibrated to mean nothing to anyone who heard it and everything to Michelle. He was telling her that her distance had been temporary. He was telling her that his patience had a limit and that she had reached it. Michelle went to the police. She documented everything. She was told there was not yet enough for a restraining order. She was told to call if anything escalated. She drove home that evening and looked at her daughters sleeping in their shared bedroom, their dark hair spread on their pillows, identical in the way that still sometimes stopped her breath, and she made a decision. She was going to take them somewhere safe while she figured out her next move. She called a friend in Chicago and arranged to bring the girls there. She told them it was a visit, an adventure, a trip on the train. They were excited. They packed their backpacks with the specific serious enthusiasm of children embarking on something significant. Michelle packed carefully and believed, or tried to believe, that she had covered her trail well enough. She had not. The men Richard sent were professional in the cold, efficient way of people hired specifically because they produce results without drama. They picked up her trail at the Indianapolis station. They followed the family all the way to Chicago. And on that Tuesday morning in November, as Michelle was walking the girls across the edge of Lincoln Park toward the street where her friend's apartment building was located, 2 of Richard's men moved toward her from behind. There was a confrontation in the narrow space between 2 parked vehicles at the park entrance. Michelle was hurt, not critically, not in a way that would make the next 60 seconds impossible, but badly enough that standing became something she could only maintain briefly. She had one moment. One clear sight line to Lily, who had turned back when she heard something wrong. Michelle looked at her daughter across 20 feet of cold November air and said one word. The word she had drilled into them without ever fully explaining why. The word that meant everything and that she had hoped, with everything in her, she would never actually need to use. She said, "Go." And so they went. Lily grabbed Luna's hand and they moved into the park the way their mother had taught them to move when something was wrong, not running in a way that announced panic, but quickly, with purpose, scanning as they went. They were looking for a man who looked like he could protect them. They had been taught what that meant, not size, not loudness, but something in the way a person carries themselves that communicates a specific, quiet capability. And there, on a bench near the lake path, sat a man with amber eyes and sharp cheekbones and an expression that was serious but not unkind. Lily stopped walking. Luna felt her sister stop and looked at her, and then looked at the man on the bench, and then looked back at Lily. "Is that," she started. "Yes," Lily said. She had studied that photograph for years. She knew that face the way you know faces you have grown up with, even without ever having been in the same room with them. She took a breath. Then she walked toward him, Luna beside her, and when they reached the bench she took his sleeve in both hands and she said the words. "Think about what those girls did in that moment. Think about what it cost them. They were 7 years old. Their mother had just been hurt behind them. They did not know what had happened to her or whether she was all right. They were in a city they did not know, in a park, in November, running toward a stranger who was also, somehow, not a stranger at all. And they did not fall apart. They did not scream. They executed a plan with a steadiness that would have been remarkable in someone twice their age. That is not just resilience. That is the specific, hard-earned composure of children who have been loved by a mother who prepared them for the world as it actually is, not as she wished it were. Michelle Park had given her daughters many things. But the most important thing she gave them was the belief that in a genuine crisis, you do not collapse. You act. And they acted. Vincent's arm was around Lily's shoulders before he had fully processed what was happening. He looked at the approaching men with an expression that cost him nothing to produce because it was not an expression he had to manufacture, it was simply what his face did when it needed to communicate that a situation had reached its boundary. The men read it correctly. They slowed. They looked at each other. The calculation they were performing was visible even from a distance, a man with 2 small children in a public park, sitting with the specific, settled presence of someone who is exactly where he belongs and is not in any way alarmed by their arrival. After a long moment, 2 of them redirected. The third held eye contact with Vincent for a few seconds longer. What passed between them in that look was not words. It was information. Accurate information, received and understood on both sides. The third man turned and left. Vincent looked down at the girls. He asked them their names. He asked them where their mother was. And when Lily told him, still calm, still steady, with the composure that made his chest ache with something he could not yet name, that their mother was hurt near the park entrance, Vincent was already standing before she finished the sentence. He found Michelle leaning against a parked car with her hand pressed against her side, conscious, holding herself together through what was clearly significant pain. She looked up at him, and for a moment, just a fraction of one, her face did something complicated and unexpected. Something that looked, impossibly, like relief. Not surprise. Not fear. Like a person who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has finally, in the worst possible circumstances, found somewhere to set it down. She said his name. Just once. Just that. He called an ambulance. He stayed beside her on the cold pavement until it arrived, and the girls sat close to her and held her hands, and by the time the paramedics came, Vincent had already begun to understand, with the specific, gathering certainty of someone who is looking at a truth they cannot avoid, that the world he thought he had not left him. That it had simply been waiting on a different bench, in a different part of the same park, for him to be ready. Michelle was admitted to Northwestern Memorial with 2 cracked ribs and a laceration requiring 11 stitches. The girls went with her in the ambulance. Vincent drove separately and arrived at the hospital to find a waiting room with a coffee machine that made terrible coffee, which he drank anyway, and a television mounted to the wall playing local news, which he did not watch. He sat in a chair near the window and looked at the park outside and thought about the fact that Lily's eyes were the same color as his. He thought about it carefully and deliberately, the way a man approaches a conclusion he already knows he has reached but needs to take his time arriving at officially. He waited 4 hours. When a nurse came to tell him Michelle was stable and asking for him, he stood, straightened his jacket in the small unconscious way of a person bracing for something that matters, and walked down the corridor toward her room. She told him everything. She started at the beginning, Richard, the relationship, the way it had ended and the way it had not ended, the 3 weeks during which Vincent had been extracting himself and she had been realizing she needed to run. She told him about Indianapolis. About the girls. About the photograph in the sketchbook and the rule she had taught them and the words she had said in the park that morning when she had no other options left. She told him that Lily and Luna were his daughters. And then she stopped talking and let the silence do what silence does, which is give a person room to absorb something too large for immediate response. Vincent did not speak for almost a full minute. He sat in the chair beside her bed with his elbows on his knees and his hands clasped in front of him, and he looked at the middle distance and he processed, not quickly, not with the rapid calculation he applied to problems that had external solutions, but slowly, the way you process something that reorganizes the entire architecture of everything you thought you understood about the past 8 years of your life. 7 years. 2 daughters. A whole life that had been happening in Indianapolis while he sat on a bench in Lincoln Park every Tuesday morning and watched the lake and believed he had no one. He did not cry. He is not a man who cries easily, and the people who knew him well would not have expected him to. But they would have recognized the stillness that came over him as something more significant than tears, the specific quiet of a man who has just understood something that changes the meaning of everything that came before it. He said, very quietly, "I want to meet them properly." Michelle looked at him for a long moment, searching his face with the careful attention of someone who is no longer sure what they are allowed to trust. Then she nodded. Richard Caldwell did not accept what had happened in the park as a setback. He was not built for accepting setbacks. He was built for pressure, for applying it in sustained, calibrated ways until the thing he wanted moved in the direction he had decided it should move. Within 48 hours of the park incident, once it became clear to him that his men had not retrieved the situation as intended, he had his legal team filing for emergency guardianship of the twins. The claim was legally absurd. He had no biological relationship to these children, no established role in their lives, and no legitimate basis for the petition. But legal absurdity is not a meaningful obstacle when you have sufficient resources to file motions that require responses, responses that require attorneys, attorneys that require fees, and fees that accumulate across months and years into a weight that people without comparable resources eventually collapse under. The filing was not a genuine legal strategy. It was a message. It was Richard reminding Michelle, through the formal machinery of the legal system, that his reach was longer than hers and that her capacity to resist him had a practical limit. 2 local news stations picked up a brief item about the guardianship filing, framed with careful neutrality as a concerned family acquaintance seeking to ensure the welfare of 2 children whose mother had been hospitalized. Vincent read it on his phone in the back of his car on a Thursday morning, and something moved in him that had not moved since the evening he had walked through Lincoln Park with Michelle and decided to change his life. Because now the stakes were not abstract. Now they were Lily, who studied every room before committing an opinion to the air. And Luna, who committed every opinion to the air simultaneously and at full volume. Now they were 2 specific, irreplaceable human beings who had trusted him on a park bench on a Tuesday morning without any evidence that he deserved it, and he was not going to stand in front of that trust and fail it. He made 3 phone calls. The first was to Carol Brennan, a family law attorney with a reputation for methodical, implacable competence in high-pressure custody cases involving significant financial disparity between parties. The second was to a private investigator he trusted, someone who had worked in the old world and had, like Vincent, successfully redirected his particular skill set toward entirely legitimate applications while retaining the precision that made him exceptional. The third was to a laboratory offering expedited DNA testing. Because as certain as he was, and he was certain in the way that requires no external confirmation, he understood that certainty needed to become evidence. That in the arena Richard Caldwell had chosen to fight in, feelings and instinct were irrelevant. Documents were everything. The results came back in 6 days. 99.9% paternity. He sat with the paper in his hands for a long time. Then he called Carol Brennan and said, "File the petition. Formal recognition of paternity and full custody rights." She said, "He is going to come at you very hard when he sees this." Vincent said, "I know." She asked, "Are you prepared for that?" He thought about the park bench. He thought about the sleeve of his coat in 2 small sets of trembling hands. He thought about Lily's amber eyes and Luna's absolute conviction about everything. He said, "Yes. If you are still watching this story right now, I want you to drop something in the comments. Right, I'm still here. Because we are only at the midpoint of this, and the next part of what happened is the part that tested everything Vincent thought he had become in 8 years. And I want to know who is with me." Richard Caldwell's response to the paternity filing was immediate and revealing. A man with no genuine claim to those children, who had no authentic concern for their welfare, would have recognized that the legal landscape had fundamentally shifted and adjusted accordingly. Richard Caldwell had spent his entire adult life in environments that rewarded refusal to adjust, and he had prospered in those environments, and that prosperity had calcified in him something that made reasonable recalibration functionally impossible. He hired additional legal counsel. He had investigators building a case against Vincent, researching his background, looking for anything usable to argue that a man with a history in organized crime was an unfit parent. He had intermediaries contact Michelle to communicate, with deniable clarity, that the legal proceedings could continue indefinitely, that he had resources she did not, and that this could all be resolved simply if she would stop resisting. Michelle did not stop resisting. She had spent 7 years running and making herself smaller, and she was done with both. She told her attorney to fight every filing. And in the evenings, while Lily and Luna slept in the guest room at Vincent's townhouse, which he had offered as a secure location and which Michelle had accepted with significantly less hesitation than either of them had anticipated, she sat at his kitchen table and they talked. Mostly about the girls. About Lily's habit of absorbing a room completely before offering an opinion on any part of it. About Luna's habit of offering simultaneous opinions on every part of every room as soon as she entered it. About the napkin drawing Lily had done at dinner, a careful, detailed rendering of the view from Vincent's living room window, accurate in a way that was startling from a 7-year-old, and about how Luna had provided a running real-time critique of that drawing while Lily produced it, with Lily responding to none of the commentary but incorporating one specific suggestion without acknowledging she had done so. He listened to all of it with the particular intensity of someone trying to absorb 7 years in the space of evenings, trying to drink an ocean through the narrowest possible opening. One night, around 10:30, Luna appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, squinting against the light with the expression of someone who has a point to make and is not going to let the lateness of the hour prevent them from making it. She looked at Vincent. She looked at her mother. She looked back at Vincent. And she said, without preamble and with complete seriousness, "Are you still pretending, or are you actually our dad now?" The kitchen went quiet in the specific way that kitchens go quiet when a 7-year-old says the truest thing in the room. Vincent looked at her. He said, "I'm not pretending." Luna considered this for a moment with the gravity of a person weighing evidence. "Okay," she said. Then she turned around and went back down the hallway to bed. He heard Michelle exhale beside him, a long, quiet exhale, like the release of something held for too long. He understood it completely because he felt the same thing in his chest. Something clicking into a place it had been kept away from for 8 years. Something that felt, astonishingly, like home. The escalation came on a Friday night, 12 days into the custody proceedings. Vincent had upgraded the security at the townhouse the week prior, not visibly, not dramatically, but with the thorough, systematic attention to detail of someone who understands what actual security requires as distinct from what security theater looks like. He had cameras covering every approach. He had 2 former law enforcement officers on rotating watch. He had shown Lily and Luna the safe room in the basement with a matter-of-fact tone, the same tone you use when you explain a fire drill, because information delivered calmly is far less frightening than the alternative and far more useful in a genuine emergency. And at 11:17 that Friday night, the external power line to the townhouse was cut. Not a neighborhood outage. Just his building. Vincent was on his feet in the dark before the backup lighting came on, because there are things the body learns in certain kinds of lives that do not unlearn themselves regardless of how many years of charcoal suits and charity galas and legitimate investment portfolios you layer on top of them. He moved Michelle and the girls to the safe room. She went quickly, without panic, the same composure she had shown in the park, the same steady forward movement under pressure that the girls had clearly inherited from her. His security team engaged the perimeter. There were 4 men outside, professional, organized, equipped in ways that confirmed they had done this before. What followed was not theatrical. It was efficient and over in less than 8 minutes, and by the time the police arrived, called the moment the power line went down, the situation was contained and the 4 men were being detained. Vincent sat on the basement stairs outside the safe room door in the aftermath and listened. Through the door he could hear Luna explaining to Lily, with absolute seriousness, a number game she had invented, walking through the rules with the methodical precision of a very small professor. He could hear Lily asking a single clarifying question. He could hear Luna amending one rule in response. He sat there in the dark basement of his townhouse with police moving through the floors above him, and he listened to his daughters play a game, and something cracked open in the middle of his chest, not painfully, but in the way that sealed things crack open when they have been closed too long and finally find the opening they need. He had fought for many things in his life. Territory. Resources. Survival, in the cold and conventional sense. He had never fought for this. For the game being played through a safe room door. For the specific, irreplaceable texture of 2 particular lives that needed him to be exactly who he had slowly, imperfectly, over 8 years, been in the process of becoming. He did not respond to Richard Caldwell with force. And this is the part of the story I want you to stay with, because it is the part that tells you the most about who Vincent had actually become. His investigator had spent 2 weeks compiling information, not about Richard's personal life, not about anything emotional or circumstantial, but about his financial operations. The 3 shell corporations. The transactions between them. The regulatory filings that did not match the operational reality they were meant to represent. The pattern, documented across 4 years of records, that told a very clear story about where money came from and where it went and who authorized what. Vincent gave the complete file to Carol Brennan. Carol Brennan delivered it, with a cover letter and a precise index, to the United States Attorney's Office. Within 3 weeks, Richard Caldwell was no longer filing guardianship motions. Richard Caldwell was managing a federal investigation that would, over the following 14 months, result in the public and complete collapse of everything he had spent 30 years constructing, and an indictment on 11 counts. He had believed that wealth was armor. He had never fully reckoned with the possibility that someone might find the seams. The adoption hearing was held on a Tuesday in March. For months, almost to the day, from the Tuesday in November when 2 small hands had grabbed his sleeve on a park bench near the lake. The courtroom was not dramatic, modest in size, fluorescent lit, with tall windows that let in the gray March light at an angle that fell across the wooden benches and the carpet and the judge's desk with a kind of accidental, ordinary beauty. Lily and Luna sat beside Vincent in matching dark blue dresses that Michelle had bought the week before. Lily was doing what she always did, sitting very still, taking in the room with the focused attention of someone committing everything to permanent memory. Luna was providing Lily with a whispered, continuous real-time commentary on the room, including the judge's reading glasses, the color of the carpet, the number of people in the gallery, and the noise the radiator was making on the far wall. When the judge turned to Vincent and asked formally, "Are you certain that this is what you want?" The room went quiet in the way rooms do when something real is occurring in them. Vincent looked at the judge. He thought, briefly and completely, about a bench in a park on a November morning, and about a sleeve grabbed in 2 sets of small hands, and about jasmine perfume, and about a photograph kept folded in the front cover of a sketchbook for 7 years, and about everything that had led, through every possible kind of difficulty and pain and consequence, to this particular chair in this particular room on this particular Tuesday in March. He said, yes. Absolutely certain. The judge made a note on the document in front of her. And then Luna turned to the judge, having been told clearly and specifically that this was not the moment for commentary, and said, in her clear, carrying voice, with the complete conviction of someone stating a simple fact, he stopped pretending a long time ago. The judge looked at her for a moment. Then she smiled. She signed the papers. And now, right now, before we go any further, I need to ask you something. And I want you to actually think about it before you answer in the comments. Would you have done what Vincent did on that park bench? If 2 children you had never seen before in your life ran up to you and grabbed your sleeve and asked you to pretend to be their father, with 3 men already moving across the park toward you, what would you have done? Would your instinct have moved before your mind did? Or would you have pulled back, told yourself it was not your problem, not your situation, not your responsibility? There is no clean answer to that question. The instinct to protect yourself is not a character flaw, it is as human as any other impulse. But so is the thing that moved in Vincent before he could think about it. So is the thing that put his arm around a child he did not know in the 4 seconds before his rational mind had finished processing what was happening. What does it tell you about a person when their instinct, in a moment that costs them something real, reaches toward rather than away? And what does it tell you about yourself, when you imagine being in that moment and feel which direction you reach? In the months following the adoption, Vincent's life changed in the specific, cumulative, ordinary ways that life changes when children are genuinely present in it. He learned that Lily's preference for scrambled eggs involved absolutely no seasoning and that she ate them while reading with the focused absorption of someone who had determined that meals were most efficiently combined with other activities. He learned that Luna's preference for breakfast was whatever Vincent was having, which she would evaluate with thorough, running commentary as she consumed it, and that this commentary was somehow both exhausting and the funniest part of his morning. He learned that bedtime was not a fixed point in time but a negotiation, and that Luna approached negotiations with a creativity and persistence that would have been genuinely impressive in a trained professional, and that Lily's method of participating in these negotiations was to say very little and produce a single expression that was, somehow, more effective than anything Luna said verbally. He learned the particular, irreplaceable sound of 2 children arguing about the fairness of a board game in the next room, a sound that was by any objective measure disruptive and was, by every subjective measure he had, the most peaceful thing he had ever heard. He learned that Lily drew everything, the view from windows, the arrangement of objects on tables, the expressions of people across restaurants, with a precision that was startling and a quietness that made the output feel almost like a private record of a very attentive inner life. He learned that Luna had opinions about Lily's drawings and was incapable of not sharing them, and that Lily's method of responding to these opinions was to listen to all of them and then occasionally, without acknowledgement, incorporate one. Michelle and Vincent did not rebuild everything overnight, and they did not rebuild it cleanly. They rebuilt it the way anything interrupted before it had the chance to become what it was going to be gets rebuilt, slowly, with significant conversation, with the particular difficulty of learning who a person has become in the years they were absent from your life. There were things that needed to be said. There were things that needed to be understood. There was time required to close the distance between who they had been to each other before everything happened and who they were now. But there was also the jasmine perfume, still the same, and the amber eyes that Lily had inherited, and the fact that they had, together, produced 2 human beings who were genuinely remarkable in ways that neither of them had planned but both of them had somehow, collectively, managed to make possible. Those things were, it turned out, a solid enough foundation on which to build something real. On the 1-year anniversary of that Tuesday in November, Vincent sat at his kitchen table with Lily on his left and Luna on his right and Michelle across from him, and he looked at the 3 of them, at the family that had found him on a bench in a park on a morning when he had not been looking for anything, and he did something that the version of himself who had existed before all of this would not have recognized. He said thank you. Out loud. Into the room. Not to anyone specifically. Just as a statement to the space around him. Luna looked up immediately. For what? Vincent considered it for a moment. For the scrambled eggs, he said. Luna looked at him with the expression of someone who finds this answer technically acceptable but personally insufficient. She went back to what she was doing. Lily kept her eyes on him for a moment longer, studying him the way she studied everything, with that quiet, complete attention, and then she went back to her book. Michelle caught his eye across the table and held it for just a second, with an expression that contained everything that did not need to be spoken aloud and was better for not being. That evening, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out a signet ring he had carried for 20 years. The ring that had meant something in the world he had come from. He had kept it through 8 years of building something different, without fully understanding why, the way you keep certain things not because you intend to use them again but because setting them down too quickly would be a kind of dishonesty about what they had cost you. He looked at it for a long moment in the lamplight. Then he walked to the mantelpiece in the living room and set it there, in the open, deliberately, not hidden, not discarded, but placed. Acknowledged. And then left behind. Not because the past was shameful and needed to be erased. But because the man standing in that living room, with 2 daughters asleep in their rooms and the woman who had kept a photograph of him for 7 years reading on the couch behind him, did not need to carry it anymore. Sometimes the most dangerous men are not changed by love. They are revealed by it. All the armor, all the strategy, all the walls constructed to keep the world from getting close enough to matter, none of it, in the end, is who a person is underneath. Underneath, there is always just a person. And sometimes it takes 2 small hands on a sleeve, on a park bench, on a cold Tuesday morning in November, to remind a man that the person he has been slowly and imperfectly becoming was there the whole time. And so I want to leave you with a question. A real one. Not rhetorical. Do you believe that people can truly change, not the surface version, not the cosmetic version, but the kind of change that goes all the way down to what a person reaches for before they have time to think about it? Because Vincent Kwan was not who he had been. And yet the thing that saved those girls, the thing that moved before his mind did on that bench, was not something he had manufactured in 8 years of building something better. It was something that had always been there, waiting for a moment large enough to call it forward. Which raises the question that I think this story is really about, is change the creation of something new? Or is it the excavation of something true? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every one of them. And if this story moved you, if it made you think about the moments in your own life where you reached towards something rather than away from it, or the moments where you wish you had, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because stories like this one are not entertainment. They are reminders. They are the quiet, persistent question the world keeps asking us about whether we are paying attention to the things that actually matter. Stay close. Because the next story we are covering involves a bodyguard who accepted a single job protecting a complete stranger and uncovered a billion-dollar betrayal that had been hiding in plain sight for decades inside one of the most trusted institutions in the country. You do not want to miss it. Subscribe. Turn on the notification bell. We are just getting started. If this story moved you, hit like. Share it with someone who believes that family is worth fighting for. And subscribe, because the next one might be even more unbelievable than this.